GPT.
Where are you getting all these?
I just Googled stupid house jokes. What do you call two witches who share a haunted house? Broommates. Okay, enough of that. And now for something completely different.
Yeah. One sec. This didn't work.
What room in the house is the most useless to a ghost? A living room.
Ooh, cold.
Okay. We can do this.
All right. Should I set it
All
up?
right. Yeah. In 3, 2, 1.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and cyborg and AI impersonating human beings and everyone else out there in the metaverse. Is that what we still call it? I guess it's appropriate. Today we're talking about, we don't even fucking know. We're talking about meta. We're talking about structures. We're thinking together about what the, I guess, North Star might be, like what the most appropriate North Star we might consider to be for the larger DAO ecosystem. Is it all about moving towards some kind of increasingly meta type structure, some kind of networked ecology, maybe, where all of these individual decentralized autonomous entities that are floating around in the fluvial flow of Web3 cyberspace should somehow be connected through some meta thing? What is it? Is it a meta DAO? Is it a meta governance? Is it a meta economy or what? Or maybe not in a mutually exclusive way, but alternatively, we could consider the micro version of that. Maybe sharding of communities or the infinite forkability of ideas and architectures and SDK and everything else. Like the does infinite composability of the Web3 space amount to some kind of encouragement for sharding, for a fractalization, an infinite regress down into the minutia of the prebiotic fluid that is the decentralized new internet? Okay, and then maybe it's not just those two choices. Maybe there's something in between. Maybe we don't have to be so extreme about meta and micro, but that's kind of our starting off point. Deacon here has a super secret rage jelly concept that I haven't even heard yet, so I can't vouch for it, but let's hear about it and let's wiggle the jelly a little bit.
All right. Yeah. So the rage jelly that Travis is talking about is I have a mirror blog and I've been posting my random stupid thoughts on. Not always stupid, but sometimes interesting. This was actually one I had just today, or actually last night. It was like in a fever dream. And well, I guess I was thinking about it a little last week. I sent Travis a little chart. We were talking about Raid Guild. So Raid Guild is another DAO that is a kind of a community of Web3 product developers and kind of a social DAO, but kind of an education DAO, kind of a freelancer DAO, kind of a venture studio. It's kind of a lot of different things. And because it's so many different things, it's kind of gets unwieldy and it's hard to stick. It's hard to get everyone like focused on one thing. Everyone, has different opinions on what it should be. Like, should it be heavier towards this or that? But anyways, it got me thinking about fractioning of DAOs and or factioning, not fractioning, factioning of DAOs and what that looks like. And so the first idea is that we're used to using on-chain DAOs. So we all start in an on-chain DAO. Everything is very like kind of constrained under this one very mechanical but cool technology. But it's kind of restraining when you start thinking about DAOs, that a DAO is only this one structure. It's like the members in the DAO voting and managing a shared treasury. But really, is the idea of the DAO something bigger? Is it more the purpose of the shared purpose of the aligned goals of the members? And if that's the case, does it start to faction? And hey, Wekaro, what's up? And and what does that mean? And then I start going the other way with it. So if a DAO can faction, say Raid Guild split into 4 different DAOs: freelancer DAO, social alumni club, onboarding, education, cohorts, boot camp kind of thing, and a venture studio. Now they're all underneath, like, waving the Raid Guild banner. They're like bannermen, but they all have their own distinct goals and purposes for their kind of localized fraction. I keep saying fraction, but I mean faction. And
Yeah.
So what does that mean, that like the Raid Guild as as a movement or a shared purpose, but there's multiple groups that are managing separate treasuries with different specific purposes under that brand. So they're all propagating the brand, they're all like doing that, but they have very distinct purposes. The interesting thing about that first, I won't keep talking, but I was going to talk about the interconnectedness there.
Yeah, I was just gonna, and I think you should do that, but maybe we should just describe a little bit what this diagram is that you spun up that kind of prompted this conversation. So, as you said, Raid Guild is a group of freelancers that have been internally discussing different kinds of production studio, like marketing studio, venture studios, other like business development strategies, all number of variety of things that have gone many different directions. And of course, I think there's also economic tensions internally about being highly aligned with the Ethereum blockchain and culture and ecosystem, while also being really strong supporters of public goods building, public goods funding, and all of that kind of stuff. So it's like we're there to make money, but then we're also there to generate maximum value for maximum recipients. And there's all these kinds of internal tensions. So Deacon has sketched out this kind of triangulation, and I really love that it's a triangle too, because I'm personally really partial to triangles. Where the DAO is kind of split between an education point, a venture point, and an alumni point, which is basically the steward of the brand and the vibes and does events and stuff. And I would think that we could chart a flow of cultural value through those points, as well as an economic value. And like I think earlier today, we were talking about in our Raid Guild meeting, actually, whether this creates dependencies, whether these entities would be considered interdependent, or whether, and how do we put that in balance with them being independent, like being able to make their own decisions, and like what are the thresholds, like where do these things begin and end? And it might be interesting to consider that in relation to what we mean when we talk about like a metastructure versus a microstructure.
Yeah, so I
And
just
Ben, I'm
posted
glad you're
that
here too.
image.
I know you have, sorry, sorry for that. I just wanted to say, Ben, I'm glad you're here too, because I know you have strong ideas about meta governance. And I wonder if these are the same things. Maybe we'll come back around to that.
Yeah, so I posted the image there, and yeah, very rough kind of idea. And just a disclaimer, it didn't fly super well in Raid Guild, although there is some alignment with really a lot of the same ideas. It sounds like there already are a couple kind of groups spinning off into different work groups, and more. So, anyways, so to make it even a little spicier, so this is internal to Raid Guild. I was thinking, like, what about going even larger the other way about this banner? And if you think about our history, the history of these DAOs that have really, stood the test of time, they're still around. They've been very permissioned and social. Starting with Moloch DAO, which is now kind of dead, maybe. But that meme was and that brand is so strong that I think a lot of people still relate Metacartel, Raid Guild, Metafactory, DAO House, Metagame, all these things underneath kind of the Moloch brand. I would say that the Metacartel brand maybe like overtook that. Now Metacartel is also having some existential crises internally. Metacartel Ventures is another one that's spin off. These are all under a similar kind of umbrella too. Maybe waving the banner flag of metacartel. Maybe even Moloch is a metacartel kind of thing now. Um, Even DAO House
Well, I mean, the banner,
and Radio.
there's so much hierarchy in this language, I feel like, but like this waving the banner thing, but really like that, all that's really happening there is just a shared mimetic thread, right? Of like metacartel or whatever in that context. There is no like actual, it's like a very soft connection. Mimetically.
Yeah, it's a soft connection, but everyone. I mean, like you can see it in MCons and MetaFests and even at ETH Denver's, and we're all connected in a way. And even if you want to layer higher, then it would be Ethereum or something like that. But um, there's power in these groups, even though they all have their own purpose, their own unique cultures, and their own unique members. There's a lot of cross pollination of members. There's a lot of cross pollination of projects we work on. So to make it kind of less informal and more formal, saying like we're all under one thing, and maybe taking kind of the failed raid token and kind of failed metacartel token and the kind of working house token, and like combining them into something that's maybe a little larger. Is that like? So that's the spicier take of like
I think this is
one.
this is an interesting point that Ven, I think, is touching upon. Uh, I don't think that it's insignificant to think about the way that we visualize the architecture in relation to the potential of these individual organizations to retain their autonomy and issues of ownership. So if we're imagining a kind of hereditary structure where somewhere on top is like Moloch DAO, and then from that there's like a child or like a sibling like descent where everything roots back to that parent. That is a hierarchical structure, for what it's worth, for good or bad or however you might feel about that. But if we were to think about it more in terms of like an evolutionary phylogeny, like in biology, where there's like numerous organisms evolving on their own. Like they're still like genetically rooted, but at some point the organism becomes a distinct like specimen. Like is like that inheritance is broken, and they almost like kind of take on their own timelines. Or fractals, for example, would be a kind of replication of similar structures, but almost requires like a multi-dimensional kind of awareness, or like thinking of not just a y-axis, like things going vertical, but like an XYZ axis, so to speak. This is a really, that's a really crude kind of abstraction that I'm offering, but I guess the point I'm trying to make is it does seem significant. Or Deacon, I wonder if you remember when we were at MCon, I think we were both a little drunk, but we were talking about this thing emanating from a middle and creating layers like an onion. And so there's still like a core that other organizations are building on, but they're radiating out in a kind of multi-dimensional way in every direction, or like, adding more and more layers to this sphere. Do you guys think that's important to consider or interesting to think about?
Can I just ask one?
Yeah, but I don't.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Fidel.
Um,
Yeah, go.
when you said it is kind of like a hierarchy at that point, right? So it's several DAOs, and then at the top level of that hierarchy, it's a DAO. So is it still a hierarchy if the top of that hierarchy is a DAO? I would say.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was wondering, because to me it feels very flat and horizontal. It's like maybe more like to what you were saying, Travis. It's like the animal kingdom. Maybe it's a phylum or something. It's like a group of very similar, like, so the top level would really just be the ethos, or the mission, or the vibes, right? And there's all these things happening underneath. And so why it works kind of in this fractal nature or recursively is that, like, if you think at the DAO level, members are like they're all in it together in that specific horizontal phylum or whatever. And they look out for each other. If one member is having some problems, they look out for each other. But if you like made this more of an organizational, multi-organizational meta kind of thing, then it would be like one organization looking out for another organization. So when one organization is going in good times, it helps out the other. Or maybe it doesn't even need to. Like Metacon or MCon is a good example of this. It's like whenever they were having that, I would always push and be like, the kind of meta family should just be automatic sponsors. If they have money, they should give some money to it. But if not, then, there's all these people outside of our like core crew that are trying to throw money at it. So coming to ask one of us for money is kind of like, well, maybe we're more the content. We're here to like provide some context of why MCon is so cool. Maybe we should be having talks and throwing workshops and things like that, but we shouldn't be like paying the sponsor fee unless we have the money to do it, And so I don't know. That's just like one example. So it's like if we make this like cross-organizational kind of union where it's like, if Metagame is having issues, DAO House is going to help them. If Raid Guild needs help, Metagame's going to help them. Metafactory is here, and in the dark forest, like building these like crews at all different levels, I think is really powerful.
I think it's a strong point. For me, it remains a question, how much of those relationships need to be formalized within a governance architecture, and how much of them can be or should be left merely implicit, relational, friendly, non-obligatory, non-mechanical, like not happen on chain, or like, you know, I definitely think you're onto something. Like there's no possibility of community, of cooperation, of collaboration, um, without those interdependencies. But it remains very much a question to me, how much of that needs to be baked into a meta architecture, whether it's a DAO of DAOs or a governance paradigm that somehow integrates, you know, not dominates necessarily hierarchically, but collates to all other governance paradigms. Like how much of it can and should be left unspoken and chaotic.
Yeah, I agree. And I don't think there should be another layer of governance for sure.
Yeah, it ties into the cultural versus the economic value. And I think one of the beauties of the factions is they can have their localized governance and whatever is most suited for that community. But I think in this kind of model, each of the individual, I don't really like the term sub DAOs, but sub DAOs would have some type of way of sending a fraction of their earnings, for lack of a better word, back to that parent DAO to support that larger ecosystem. And I think it's necessary to have mechanisms in place to enforce that.
Ben, if you're speaking, we can't hear you. Yeah, I think some of those relationships should be like for sake of accountability, like you're saying, E to T. I was thinking too, there's other ways of thinking about these relationships and interdependencies. One of my favorite, probably my absolute favorite talk from ETH Denver last year was Tracheoptrix talking about the Sophanophore as being an excellent model for DAOs to aspire to. So basically, a Sophanophore is a colonial, I don't know if you say colonial, a colony of creatures, like a colony composed of discrete creatures that kind of work together to achieve, you know, movement, basically, and like protection and a variety of other things that they couldn't achieve alone, almost like a coral reef. And then another, probably my absolute favorite kind of thought experiment for DAOs is something that I get from Donna Haraway's book, Staying with the Trouble, where she describes the bacteria, the protozoan kind of bacteria that live inside the stomachs of termites, which is called what is it called? Mixotricha paradoxa. So inside the stomach of termites is this protozoa that helps digest the wood. And then the termites work together as a kind of colonial or a colony of like a superorganism to provide this really important service for the forest. And so it's just this like this creature nested inside of another creature, inside of another creature, inside of another creature, composing this kind of infinite regress of the complexity of an ecosystem. Like, I don't think the DAO space has even come close to approaching that yet. We're still like single-celled flagella, just like swimming around in the soup, you know? Like, I don't know. I think so there's something structural to consider there too.
I think it's easier to implement at a scale like you started talking about in the beginning, Deacon, where you take a decent sized DAO like Raid Guild that has these ideas for different initiatives and different things they want to work on, and then you form the DAOs out of that instead of taking these already formed and, you know, successful or not DAOs that are kind of doing their own thing and trying to coordinate and bring everybody together can be a real challenge. I think we saw that with Uber House. Um, and yeah, I think that's where the difficulty comes in, is like the coordination part, which I think we all understand that by now.
Yeah, definitely the being able to that top level mission or ethos or whatever it is, the vibe. Um, that is the guiding principle, right? And so if there has to be a bunch of communication and cross communication across orgs and governance at a higher level, then it's lost any of its um, agility, I guess. You know, it's gets bogged down with coordination problems and all of that shit. Which yeah, we saw in Public House. But it's there, right? So
In Uber
that's I guess
House.
what I'm saying is like yeah, in Uber House, yeah, um, not in Public House, hopefully, but or I guess it's that connecting force, the gravity of metacartel is there still. Um, so it seems like it's something worth trying to leverage in some way, in a little more of a formal. It's hard. I mean, it's easy in a bear market to do things like this. In a bull market, it's hard because then everyone is very like on their own mission and spinning off into the universe with all this extra momentum. In a bear market, that's the contraction side, right? That's when we're like contracting, and it's like, oh, it does make sense for us to like hold each other up right now, instead of standing on each other's heads
Hey,
as we're
sorry
floating
to
around.
hop in here. Can you guys hear me? I've been trying to get my mic sorted out.
I hear you. I hear your
Now we can.
chickadees. I
Word.
hear your
Okay,
nightingales
cool.
in the background.
Isn't it pretty? Yeah, this is a super interesting conversation. It's funny because I'm sitting here with my uncle Lee, and he also shared some perspectives on why we haven't been able to get to that point yet, and sort of like this meta coordination problem of, uh, once again, like capitalist society, like those conditions that we've built a lot of how humans organize around, at least in the West. Those things, kind of causing the issue of human attention being misplaced, maybe not misplaced, let's say displaced, toward things that uh, aren't in the best interest of really reshaping these models and how we approach, organizing across different networks, across different ecosystems, across different communities and projects. And I think that is just a really interesting kind of just like a mental or just realization, just acknowledging that exists. And then I wanted to touch on something really quick if I can. Basically, like I don't like jumping, or I have a tendency to jump to solutions, but uh, you know, not wanting to get into that too much, but really just like this notion of giving organizations the ability to act like very swiftly on making a decision whether or not to support a community, and having the option to support a community at any instance, and what that looks like. Like I think of like the thing that comes to mind for me is like, oh, what if like DAO House could buy an option to acquire Raid Guild tokens and swap house tokens, uh, directly over the market, right? Is that what you call it? Sorry, I'm botching it. Doesn't matter. Anyway, yeah, I think this like notion of an organization just being able to see, oh, this is what Raid Guild is like uh, offering right now, right, as an organization, and then just execute this trade that allows us to give them some liquidity or like capital inflow, and then give us some representation in the sense that, okay, now we're holding Raid token. We're maybe there's some other sort of like mechanic there, but with like being able to have that liquidity held on DEX or something. Yeah, okay, I've said enough. But yeah, cool conversation as always.
Thanks, pal.
Oh man. One of the things that comes to mind for me is we somewhat historically have been bad at clearly being explicit about vision and values and what an organization is actually trying to do. And in a model like we're discussing right now, I think that that becomes even more and more important. So I think it's definitely a way that we can make improvements to all of our organizations.
Real
Yeah,
quick,
these
do
are
you
all
guys hear
strong
Ben, by the
points.
way? He's been
No, Ben, we see you
You guys-
unmuting, but we can't hear you, bud.
interesting. I can hear him through my headset.
Oh, maybe it's just me. Maybe I just can't hear Ben.
No, I can't either.
No go.
I can't hear him either.
All right, troubleshoot.
You guys have a direct telepathic connection that the rest of us are excluded from.
Maybe Walker, you
Working us.
Brett? No, I don't want to put you on the spot.
Wakaro, did you have
Oh, put
something
me on the
you wanted
spot.
to say?
I
Or...
like being put on the spot. Go ahead.
I was just saying, if somebody that can hear Ven, can maybe interpret or flow through them.
It's a great coordination.
Silent chili.
Well, Ven is figuring his mic situation out. I think this notion of I kind of want to bring this around to the conversation that DAOs are sort of scaleless entities or have this tendency to continue to grow outside of the like organism that incubates what it becomes, and then sort of
Check. One. Check. One. Check. 1 2 1 2 1 2.
through some contractual mechanisms. I don't know.
Right. So
Yeah.
there's issues of scale, there's issues of architecture, there's issues of the image that we keep in our minds and how that correlates to how we build these organizational structures. There's issues of like interdependencies, whether it's through token exchanges. There's the need for organizations to kind of perform a resilience and an agility through the tumultuous kind of tidal waves, the volatility of the bear bull cycles. And there's needs to return to our vision and values, as E to T pointed out. So how do we make sense of all this as far as metastructures, microstructures? Is it fractalizing out ever bigger? Is the idea of a fractal as a mental image the metastructure of which all the DAOs are the micro manifestations of? Or maybe we're getting to the point where this thing that we started with isn't very useful anymore.
You hear me?
We hear you, Ven.
Yeah. Bring it.
Roger that.
I have nothing to say anymore.
Dang it, then.
No, you're joking. Come on.
Okay, fine. What was I saying with Val's thing? Oh, he was talking about like what could we do or whatever, but about with the liquidity, and yeah, financial liquidity is one thing, but the liquidity of talent and services I think is really interesting. And been talking to like WGMI and Addie and Jack over there about how they're thinking about, because one thing that became because DAOs, in order for DAOs to coordinate together in these metastructures, they need to be able to take care of themselves first, just as we do as individuals, right? So, and one thing that happens in a lot of DAOs is that they end up needing a lot of things, like websites and whatever different things that they don't actually know how to do or have the talent, services to create, or capital to pay for, or and whatever, right? So, one interesting thing that's been talked about is just starting on a path of mutual aid of services. So making trades, as Bat was saying, but like, on actual like services that could help actually each separate DAO get a better foundation for itself. And then from there, then maybe we can start doing some more ecological stuff.
See, that's a really cool idea of adding some cohesion to that larger metastructure, having ways to trade services. I was using govern the other day, and one thing that like stuck out to me is that, I've thought about the connections between DAOs a lot, and how like DAOs can be part of other DAOs, and DAOs like can be a member of a DAO or whatever. But there's also these connections of like a member in one DAO is also a member in another DAO. So that makes a connection. But the connection that came up to me in Govern was the collaboration of DAOs together on one thing. That's another link. Like, say, like, with all these protocols and quote unquote public common good kind of things, multiple DAOs need to start using it, so they collaborate cross DAO to like help the public goods flourish between them, right? But that then creates a network connection between the DAOs that isn't like strictly capital or strictly membership or strictly talent. It's like they collaborated on something together to create something, which I don't know. So I don't know where that goes. Not exactly tied in with service exchanges, but there's something kind of there.
Wiggle the jelly.
Yeah, I think you're back to the maybe an umbilical placenta, like mother baby nutrient distribution tether there. No, I'm just kidding. No, absolutely, the exchange of
Cut the tether.
of those.
Don't cut the cord.
You're definitely onto something there. I'm wondering if Mr. Dead Cell and Wackaro, you guys been hanging out. Also, Vanilla, if you guys had any thoughts on any of this. No pressure.
I find some of the biomimicry examples interesting. The comparison to life forms. When we talk about DAOs, we're talking about the stephanophores, or the idea of like multicellular organisms all kind of communicating. I think it'd be interesting to dive more into that and think about how the human body or any life form delegates tasks to different regions and communicates amongst the multicellular organism. Something I haven't really thought too deep on, but I like that analogy before.
Yeah, if you want to riff on that,
Well,
something I've been thinking about recently is like how different organisms, completely different species, could have like psychedelic reactions to each other. Like you have this frog that's just jumping around in the desert, in the Sonoran Desert in Arizona, and then you squeeze some of its juice into your human eyeball, and now you're like tripping out and seeing like fractaline geometries in the sky, and it can like totally change your whole reality. Like when are we going to get to the point where DAOs become so unique in their structure, but that can cause those kinds of psychedelic responses in each other?
Is that like an exploit? One DAO exploits another because it's doing something that might not affect itself, but is detrimental to another.
Well, that's absolutely the interesting thing about it. It's no longer a kind of species to species or organism to organism relationship that is obviously beneficial or detrimental. It's not like this organism is giving nutrients to another one, or like this organism is the predator or prey to this other one. There's seeming no natural utility to something like a psychedelic drug, and yet, just to use that as an example, could use any number, like alcohol or any kind of like inebriant or intoxicant. It's like there's no utility for human beings to do that to ourselves, except for things like joy, except for like crazy philosophical thought, which is absolutely life changing. And so it's like, when did DAOs get to form relationships that fundamentally, like going back to what E2T was saying, like how could a DAO have psychedelic impact on another DAO's vision and values?
Well, I mean, it's about these like symbiotic relationships between a like healthy ecosystem. It's not only the ecosystem of like your cells joining together to make a body part or something. It's also your like gut biome that it has its own desires, but it is absolutely necessary for you to like survive. But it doesn't give it needs you to survive because it needs your gut.
That's interesting, yeah,
to live
because
it.
it's still part of basically our multicellular organism. It just doesn't share our DNA, which creates a whole other interesting dynamic. That like, how much is our gut microbe, our microbiome, part of us, or is it part of our body? And I'd argue it's heavily part of our body. It just doesn't share our DNA.
Or are we part? Are we part of it?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
like.
I mean, we need them as well.
To tie it, yeah, and to tie it into Travis's thing about the psychological aspects. Wasn't like our gut kind of our primary driving force for a long time? Just to eat and survive. Eventually, it gave way to our brain evolving. Which on the psychological level, like maybe is psychological stuff not only an individual evolution, but evolution on a level of a species. Like, did someone put some frog juice in their eye and that made them go climb a tree and look at the stars for a while and think about math or something, And then did that happen for like thousands of years or millions of years until it like eventually became something like biological that changed in our brains to start thinking about
I would say that's like a little different than how like evolution will normally work. Normally, there's just these random mutations and changes, and it either increases likelihood you survive or it doesn't. Rarely does it increase the likelihood, but when it does, that can be an advantage going forward. So I don't know, maybe we just got, we weeded out all the people who couldn't handle psychedelics, maybe.
Yeah, but I don't know, you're kind of onto something there. A thread that I would try to connect between what Deacon is saying about individuals co-evolving beyond just individual, self-interestedness, and what you're talking about, Paul, is like when we take biological theories and apply them towards social. Like I just listened to this podcast recently where there was a really awesome, deep conversation with a ecologist, basically talking about how Darwin's original theory wasn't survival of the fittest, but survival of the fit. What he meant to say, what he originally said in the first 4 editions of his text, was to comment on fitness, that organisms evolve a fitness in relation to their surroundings, that they are embedded within their surroundings, and that you can't remove, you can't really cleanly disentangle them from each other, an organism from the environment. But what that turned into was the idea being co-opted by a social theorist whose name escapes me, Milton, I can't remember. And when applied towards social theories, it turned into the notion of fittest, and became a kind of banner for healthy competition, which, as we all damn well know, continues to inform and steer the momentum of industrial development to this day, based kind of not just on a misunderstanding, but on a like very intentional steering of that idea for like social momentum. So I mean, I think well, anyways, I won't comment further. I'll just say that. Thoughts?
I think to bring it back to the original thing, maybe what we're trying to discover here is, and talking to Bao's point as well, like this kind of capitalistic thing where it's, is kind of survival of the fittest, do whatever it takes to become the strongest and the most wealthy and the most powerful, even if that means like destroying everything around you, to something that's about being more the more fittest.
Yeah, I'd argue almost. I don't know. When we talk about evolutionary fitness in particular, it's not necessarily a matter of being like the strongest. It's typically, at least the way I think about it, is the ability to pass your genes on. Like evolutionary fit means you're able to replicate and extend one more generation, essentially, versus something that's not fit may not. I guess to me, I don't see it as like form of like dominating or being the quote unquote strongest or any of those types of things, but having the ability to perpetuate. I guess even I don't know, and through that process, like that's where evolution can make adjustments. Not sure if
I'm
that
kind
helps.
of getting
And over like
kind of. Go ahead, Deacon.
no, go E22, you got it.
I was just getting lost in the biology. So I was trying to think about something else, and I was thinking about cities and neighborhoods and kind of that way that communities are organized. And within a neighborhood, you've got somebody that cuts grass, somebody that makes tacos, somebody that changes tires, and there's different levels of decisions that are made within the neighborhood, within the city, within the individual business, but they all kind of help each other, right? Like the tire shop that I go to has a dope taco stand in the parking lot, right? And so if those businesses kind of support each other, mostly just because of like geography, but I'm wondering, how we can represent some of these structures within DAOs, within our virtual neighborhoods, because I ultimately believe that the way that we scale this thing is by composing smaller organizations together, not by trying to make these giant, massive DAOs, Anyway.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
But also at the same time, like local businesses are kind of fucked too. Like, I don't know. It seems to be getting better, at least in my area, but still, like, they have similar problems where people just don't show up because there's somebody somewhere more convenient or cheaper or whatever it is, or they could just get it online, or obviously tire shop maybe not, but
Right. I've thought on
That's
that. I
that
feel like one thing
centralizing
that
force.
yeah, exactly. And there's always a balance, I think, with everything between centralizing forces and not, because like life depends on forms of centralization. But life is also like there's feedback mechanisms in place I've talked about before, where like having a negative feedback loop, meaning when something gets bigger, there's a natural force to dampen it. Like this is one of the critical pieces to biology or to like the capitalism, where things get too big. We talk about merging smaller entities, and well, if that's the motivation or if that's incentivized, that's just going to keep happening and happening until it gets bigger and bigger. And in nature, what that results in, that's a positive feedback loop, where the bigger you are, the bigger you can get. And those tend to end in catastrophe or explosion, or in nature, cancer is an example where it just consumes the host because it doesn't have those same mechanisms in place to keep things in check.
Right.
Can I bring it back
But
real
is
quick?
that also an evolutionary driver? Because you have these like explosions of something that works and then a bottleneck that only the ones, you shrink the gene pool down. But
It also reminds
I
me
don't
of
know.
the
We
Linux essay on the cathedral and the bazaar. Vanilla, were you trying to bring us
Right.
back somewhere?
I was trying to bring us back to where we started here, like with the fractionalization or fractalization, or I forget whatever you were trying to say, Deacon, of communities. And if you picture a community like you talked about in the beginning, that is made up of smaller communities doing their own thing, eventually that first DAO or the top level DAO or however you want to say it, it's not really a hierarchy, I think we decided, but eventually that DAO would be like the conglomerate, right? But kind of like a good conglomerate, because it's a DAO. I don't know, my mind is kind of breaking.
Yeah,
Getting
Pepsi
it's
clear.
interesting. And
part of the DAO
you can
right
even
now.
look at like the network effects of. I mean, this is what the token stuff is all about, right? Like, the OP token is to become the conglomerate of all the different projects underneath it through public goods funding, or the ARB token is its own thing. That they're trying to add these incentives to create these systems where people work together to boost the larger organization. And right, or Ethereum. And so if Ethereum's the only thing, then did we screw up? There should be other L1s that are popular, even if they're shitty and VC owned. But we are almost out of time, so maybe we do some closing thoughts.
Even if they're shitty, do we want other L1s even if they're shitty? Sorry, I'm still cracking up over that statement. Yeah, I think we covered a lot of ground here. I think we covered a lot of angles without having really come to any conclusions or any resolutions. It seems like maybe this implication that it's not just metastructures and it's not just microstructures, but it's like an infinite regress of thinking about nested structures, which is essential. Which to me brings up a whole slew of additional questions about maybe about like roles and specialization and knowledge sharing, something like that. Like E to T uses this kind of war analogy: people staying in the trenches, doing the hard, dirty work. Other people up on the hill line, keeping their sights on the horizon. We have to figure out how these perspectives can communicate across that divide better, rather than like trying to bring the whole group to one position or the other. Yeah. Anyone else have any final moments of Zen?
Deacon's
Meditations?
proud of his beer, but it still has wax on top. So I don't know what he's waiting for. I would love to see us explore kind of the opposite direction of fractionalization and seeing, how we can figure out ways to compose various communities before making bigger and bigger umbrellas. But both are really interesting, right? Because some of those fractions are going to be flying the flag of a bigger organization. And so I'd love to see where that goes.
Yeah, I still got the wax on top here, and I'm gonna save this one until my son graduates from or gets his GED or whatever he wants to do. But he can drink it in 20 years or so.
Maybe he just wants to go to the Sonoran Desert and hang out with psychedelic frogs all day. Would
That's
you support
fine,
that
but-
decision?
Yeah,
That beer will be psychedelic in 20 years.
He's got to be at least 13. So. But yeah, I don't. This beer should last, right? It's a imperial stout. I think it'll last. So we'll try it out. I'll crack the wax on another one. I got 3 of them, so forget about it. Anyways, if anyone's wondering about this beer,
Well, not for that
go
long.
to Raid Brewed and go get one. It's actually an NFT underneath here, but you got to crack this thing to collect the full NFT, and it's pretty special beer. Aged for a year in a whiskey barrel, strong as hell. A lot of history around MCon.
Maybe this
Oh,
is the uniting
nice.
factor.
Yes. Maybe, yeah, you have to have one of these to be in the club. In the club. Cool. Well, I hope that was recorded. That was a really fun, interesting convo. They always are. And thanks everyone for coming to the house party.